What's going on, gamers? It's your boy SolarFury, and today I am on the channel with a complete deck guide. This is something that I haven't done in a very long time on the channel. I believe the last time I did a video like this was actually pretty much a year ago. It was in July of 2019, and it was a Golem Beatdown deck guide video, and that is exactly what I'm going to be doing again today. Looking back at that video, it actually performed super well for the size of my channel back then. But looking back at it again, I feel like the video was really poorly made. So I'm going to be remaking the video and updating it to fit today's Clash Royale meta and adding some extra tips in there as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. Also, I will be having timestamps on the screen for the different categories. I'm going to start out with doing some basic tips for Golem. Then I'm going to dive into some individual matchups like Golem versus Pekka and things like that. I'm also going to talk about some more in-depth strategy, kind of like Elixir counting and things like that. Then at the very end, I will show you the basic structure of every single Golem deck in Clash Royale, and also show you guys my favorite Golem deck in Clash Royale. So let's go ahead and start out with some basic tips for Golem Beatdown. So I think it's pretty common knowledge that Golem is one of the most expensive archetypes in all of Clash Royale because most Golem decks are 4 Elixir and up. I think the cheapest Golem deck I've seen in a long time is 3.9 Elixir, and so with that being the case, managing your Elixir is very, very important. Basically, what I would recommend is do not play your Golem at all during single Elixir unless you know for a fact that you're up like 2 or 3 Elixir on your opponent, and what you want to do for the majority of single Elixir is play defense and make positive Elixir trades, so that way in double Elixir, you will have an advantage, and that way you can beat down on your opponent. In terms of starting plays for Golem, one thing I would recommend for every single Golem deck is to always try to let your opponent make the first move, no matter what, because you have no idea what your opponent has. So like if you cycle a Barb Barrel at the bridge, then your opponent plays a Goblin Barrel, and you don't have your Tornado in cycle, that's a lot of unnecessary damage done. So with Golem, I always like to let my opponent play first. So one thing I always like to say is play reactively, not proactively. I would say this applies for most decks in Clash Royale, but especially Golem, you always want to react to what your opponent plays instead of making the first move. Another thing to note is that, in my opinion, it is okay to take a lot of damage on a tower if you know that you can tower trade with your opponent, or even you can totally lose a tower if you want to, again, if you know that you can tower trade with your opponent. With Golem, it's one of those situations where you can play really light defense, and if you lose a tower, it's not going to be the end of the world because you can beat down on your opponent. Although I would only recommend doing this if you know 100% for sure, well, not 100%, maybe like 90%. If you have a good understanding of what's going on in the match and that you know that you can take the other opponent's tower. Another basic tip while playing Golem is to never, ever give your opponent any spell value. When you're building up a big push behind your Golem, always make sure to space out your troops accordingly. So if you play a Night Witch directly behind the Golem, do not play a Baby Dragon right on top of that Night Witch. That is rocket value to the core. That's 8 Elixir behind the Golem. The rocket is only 6 Elixir. Now your opponent is up 2 Elixir, and it's not going to be looking very good for you. And so the last basic tip that I want to give, this is for all of you people on ladder out there. I know you guys, I go up against you guys a lot, but never play your Golem at the bridge during single Elixir. This is way too much of a commitment, way too early in the match, and this is so easily punishable. Say you play a Golem at the bridge during single Elixir, your opponent can just rush Lumberjack Balloon opposite lane. That's just one example, but there's so many other decks that can easily just expose you if you play Golem at the bridge during single Elixir. The only situation where I would recommend that this is okay is if you know for a fact that you are up 3 or 4 Elixir on your opponent. This is the only situation where I would recommend this, but otherwise, just wait to play your Golem until double Elixir. Next up, we're going to do a little bit of advanced strategy and talk about your opponent's card cycle. Now, this really doesn't just apply for Golem, but really with any deck that you play, you want to make sure that you pay attention to your opponent's card cycle. This is something that is very important to learn, as this separates people that are, slightly below average or average players to being above average or great players. If you can know your opponent's card cycle, it can definitely give you a big edge in a match. So while this technique may seem a little bit difficult, it really isn't that hard to master once you get the hang of it. So let's just say your opponent plays a bandit at the bridge. Okay, so since there are 8 cards in a deck, and you can have 4 cards at once in your card slot, it means that opponent will have to play 4 other cards in order for them to get back to their bandit. This is a very important strategy, especially for Golem players, because there are certain cards that you need to know when your opponent has them in cycle and when your opponent has them out of cycles, such as an Inferno Tower, a Pekka, or an Inferno Dragon. Cards like that that are really dangerous against Golem, you want to make sure when your opponent has those in cycle and when they are out of cycle. So next up, we are going to talk about Golem versus some other popular archetypes in Clash Royale. Even though a lot of Golem decks are very different from each other in Clash Royale, they all have the same principle, but they can have a lot of different cards in the decks. Pretty much these tips for the certain matchups apply to every single Golem deck in Clash Royale, because all Golem decks have pretty much the exact same play style. Unless you're playing some weird like 2.9 Elixir Golem cycle deck. In that case, this video isn't for you. Go somewhere else. No, I'm just kidding. Please stay. I need the watch time, please. Thank you. So let's start out by talking about a mirror matchup, which is Golem versus Golem. Mirror matchups can honestly be kind of difficult, because if you make one tiny mistake, that can literally cost you the entire game. Although the best tip that I can give is if your opponent goes one lane with a Golem, you need to go down that exact same lane with your Golem. This is going to allow for your Golem to sponge for his Golem's supporting troops, while your supporting troops end up taking out his Golem. And also, if you're playing a Golem deck that has a tornado in it, utilize this tornado to the best of your ability on defense, because a tornado paired with other cards that are pretty common in a Golem deck, like an Ice Wizard or a Baby Dragon or an Electro Dragon, can absolutely devastate your opponent's push and give you the edge and literally change the pace of the entire match. As I said, mirror matchups can be pretty difficult, but if you just stay calm, you stay cool, and you stay collected, poised, composed, any other adjective that is synonymous to those, then you should do perfectly fine. The match may extend far into overtime and even potentially go into a tiebreaker, but in the end, if you do all of these things, you should have no problems. Next up, we're going to talk about Royal Giant. Now, I know Royal Giant isn't as popular right now as it has been in the past, but recently it kind of has been resurging back into the meta with Royal Giant Cycle, with other cards like the Firecracker, the Goblin Cage, and the Royal Delivery, so I'm going to put Royal Giant in this video anyway. Royal Giant can honestly be a little bit tricky at sometimes, especially Royal Giant Cycle, and especially because most Royal Giant decks will have some type of big spell, whether it's a Fireball, Earthquake, or Lightning. This is one of those situations where spacing out your troops is absolutely crucial because of these big spells that your opponent will most likely be having. Against Royal Giant is also a situation where I feel like taking tower damage is really okay. Maybe you can play some light defense on a Royal Giant with a Lumberjack, 4 Elixir for 6 Elixir, and then focus on building up a big push opposite lane. If you do this, I think then you will have no problems. And also, if you keep applying constant pressure with Golems and double Elixir, then that won't allow your opponent to play a Royal Giant at the bridge, because 6 Elixir is a really big commitment to put at the bridge. So if you keep applying constant pressure with Golems and double Elixir, your opponent won't be able to play any Royal Giants. And at a minimum, you should be able to cycle Golem death damage on the tower, which is really devastating, and you should end up winning your match no problem. Next up, we're going to be talking about Hog Rider matchups. And these matchups, I feel like, are some of the easiest in my opinion. Pretty much all you have to do is prevent the Hog Rider from getting more than 2 hits at a time on your tower, take spell value on cards such as a Musketeer, a Firecracker, or a Cannon, and then just overload with the Golem push, because there isn't that much your opponent can do for these big beefy Golem pushes, especially if your opponent is playing a deck like 2.6 Hog. Although I would like to say a Hog mini Pekka is a little bit of a different situation. Since most Hog decks are really fast cycling, your opponent is most likely going to have a mini Pekka in hand ready to take care of your Golem at all times. Against these decks, I would always make sure that you get your supporting troops on top of the mini Pekka. Like, distract the mini Pekka, just take it out really quick, do something for the mini Pekka, because I really feel like in Hog Cycle that a mini Pekka is the true only weakness to these decks. Next up, we are going to talk about the good old Giant. The biggest tip that I can give while playing against a Giant deck is to go same lane as the Giant. Since the Golem has the most health out of any card in the entire game, while your supporting troops are busy taking out the Giant, your Golem will most likely still be alive after they're done taking out the Giant, so then you'll have supporting troops to counter push behind that Golem, and then you can do a lot of damage to your opponent's tower. The Giant is a pretty tanky tank. It's one of the tankiest cards in the entire game, but it is not the tankiest tank in the entire game, which the Golem is, and overall this will give you an edge in most giant matchups. Next up, we're going to talk about Pekka, which I know a lot of people fear when playing Golem, because a lot of people feel like Pekka is a matchup that they really just can't beat, but that really isn't the case. If you play it right, then Pekka can definitely be a manageable matchup. What I usually do with Pekka is I first try to bait out one of their big spells. Most Pekka decks are going to have either a poison or a lightning. That is pretty much a guarantee. So if I can bait out one of their big spells with, say, like an Electro Dragon, a Lumberjack, or Baby Dragon, or something like that, then I am feeling really comfortable early on. Then what I'm going to do, I will usually play my Golem in the back, and normally in response to a Golem in the back, then my opponent will play a Pekka in the back. That is a pretty common response for a Pekka player. So basically, I'll just continue supporting my Golem with all of my good old supporting troops, you know, Night Witch, Baby Dragon, Mega Minion, really anything you want, Flying Machine even, and honestly, the best way to defeat Pekka against a Golem matchup is just to simply overload. If you've done your job early on and baited out one of your opponent's big spells like a poison or a lightning, they won't have any way to effectively deal with your supporting troops. So that means your supporting troops can just absolutely DPS the heck down from the Pekka, and they can take out the Pekka. And even if the Pekka ends up taking out the Golemites will still be alive, and they'll be tanking for all your supporting troops that stayed alive early on. So I feel like the best way to defeat Pekka is to overload. This is the way that I go about defeating Pekka matchups, and it works most of the time, not all of the time, but I definitely win against Pekka more than I lose. Next up, we'll talk about Graveyard, the RNG master. So if you're running a Golem deck that has a poison spell, just be sure to use that poison on the Graveyard every single time, and then you'll be just fine. Although if you don't have a poison and you're running lightning instead, then admittedly, Graveyard can be a little bit challenging. The Barbarian Barrel can be somewhat of a decent counter along with something else like maybe an Ice Wizard or a Baby Dragon, but even then you won't negate all damage that the Graveyard will do. Most of the time, if I'm playing a Golem deck that has a lightning instead of the poison, I'm gonna end up going for a tower trade. This probably honestly isn't the best thing to do, but I've found a lot of success with this, because if I just tower trade, go opposite lane, they're down Elixir from committing so much to a Graveyard push, and I just build up my big Golem push, and I can just easily overwhelm my opponent. And also, since Splash Yard isn't really that popular anymore since the Tornado rework, you don't really have to worry too much about seeing an Ice Wizard, Baby Dragon, and Tornado along with a Bomb Tower absolutely destroying your Golem push. Most Graveyards now are featured in Giant or even some Mega Knight decks, which is really weird. So all in all, you shouldn't have to worry too much about facing Splash Yard. Next up, we have Logbait. Logbait may seem like a difficult matchup, as a lot of Logbait decks have an Inferno Tower and a Rocket, which are both really hard to deal with in theory, but it really isn't that hard to deal with. In terms of the Inferno Tower, if you're playing a Golem deck with Lightning, then it's literally a dream come true. All you gotta do is save your Lightning for the Inferno Tower, and you're good to go. Your Golem has a clear path to that tower, and at a minimum, you're gonna get some death damage. If you're playing Golem with Poison and you're not able to take out the Inferno Tower immediately, then what I recommend doing is getting your Night Witch going early on behind the Golem, so that way your Night Witch can spawn a bunch of bats, so the bats can distract the Inferno Tower. And then also, what you can do is you can play a card right at the bridge, right before the Golem crosses the bridge, so that way the Inferno Tower will target that card instead of targeting the Golem. Like, you can play a Mega Minion right at the bridge, right before the Golem, and the Inferno Tower will target the Mega Minion, temporarily giving the Golem some time to get to the Inferno Tower to take it out. And in terms of avoiding the Rocket, just space out your troops, and you should be good to go. It's that simple. And now we have the dreaded Expo. This one is really tricky for sure. You may feel like you have the edge against Expo, but a really good Expo player, which most Expo players are, they can easily find a way to beat a Golem matchup. What I like to do against Expo is if I have my Golem in cycle and they play an Expo at the bridge, I like to play my Golem opposite lane of the Expo, so that way the Expo will target the Golem, and then I like to drop a Barbarian Barrel or a Baby Dragon or something like that to end up taking out the Expo. If you don't have your Golem in cycle, then play a ground troop or a building such as a Goblin Cage, and then distract the Expo with that, and then again, Barb Barrel, Baby Dragon on top of the Expo, and doing this will work most of the time. Doing this will work most of the time against most Expo decks. But Icepo, on the other hand, that deck is a totally different story. I'm gonna keep it real with you. The Icepo deck is completely cracked, and there's like nothing that any deck at all can do against Icepo. This is the most broken deck in the game in my opinion, and there's really not much you can do about it except to go for a tiebreaker. I wish I had a good way to beat Icepo, but I don't. I'm sorry. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the matchup that I believe is the hardest for a Golem player, at least for me, and that is going to be Lava Hound. For Lava Hound, one thing in particular is so crucial, and that is to never ever cycle any of your air cards. Let's say that you cycle a Mega Minion going down the left lane, but then your opponent drops a Lava Hound in the back going the right lane. That can honestly be game over right there, because one of your most important air cards is out of rotation. Another thing that I normally like to do is to play my Golem same lane as the Lava Hound if I have it in cycle. This will allow for your Golem to sponge for the supporting troops behind a Lava Hound, such as an Inferno Dragon or a Flying Machine, and then your supporting troops like a Baby Dragon, a Mega Minion, Elixir Dragon, so on and so forth, can go on and take out the Lava Hound and then counter push behind the Golemites or the Golem that is still left behind. Also, make sure to be really smart with your spells. Say your opponent puts a Lava Hound in the back and then immediately puts a Flying Machine behind it. I would recommend not playing a spell on the Flying Machine immediately, but maybe wait until they do an Inferno Dragon or a Baby Dragon or something like that, and then I would go ahead and lightning or poison those troops. With this way, you just get more value out of your spells. Now, I know that these are just 8 popular matchups that you may face on ladder, and I know there's so many more matchups, but I felt like these matchups were the most important to cover. Another popular set of decks right now going around features the Royal Hogs and the Heal Spirit, but really I feel like with the Royal Hogs, if you apply the same tips that I gave for the Hog Rider matchups, you really should be fine, and especially if you have a Goblin Cage or something like that that can pull the Royal Hogs, then I really don't see any issues on why you should lose to a Royal Hogs matchup. And so now, I'm going to share my favorite Golem deck with all of you guys, and also go over the basic structure of every single Golem deck in Clash Royale. So this right here is actually my favorite Golem deck in Clash Royale. If you've been around the channel for at least a month, if you've watched any of my live streams, then you will see me playing this deck. It is a 4.1 Elixir Golem deck that features a Poison as the big spell, and also a Goblin Cage in here as a building. So really the basic structure of a Golem deck really isn't too complicated. You of course are going to have a Golem, and then on top of that Golem, you're going to have supporting troops, then you will have spells, and then as an option, you can have a building. And if you're going to use a building, I would recommend putting the building in place of one of the spells. A lot of Golem decks will use 3 spells, so you put the Goblin Cage or any other building in place of one of those spells, so that way you still have 2 spells and all of your supporting troops. So looking at this deck right here, I think there are a couple of must-haves in every single Golem deck. One thing that I think you must have in every Golem deck is going to be a Night Witch. The Night Witch is the most important supporting troop that you can put behind a Golem, and it's also really solid on defense against cards like a Giant, a Royal Giant. It does well against Hog Riders as well, so I would say Night Witch is definitely the most important, as it does well on defense, and you can counter push as well. I would say the real value of the Night Witch is honestly with her bats. Sure, when the Night Witch gets on her tower, it can be devastating, but the constant spawning of her bats gives you an extra air troop, which is really solid. I would say the next most important troop is going to be the Baby Dragon, and in this meta for right now, at least when this video is being recorded, you could replace the Baby Dragon with the Skeleton Dragons for sure, but I still prefer the Baby Dragon. The Baby Dragon, I would still say, is one of, if not the most versatile splash damaging cards in the entire game. It's a flying troop, it's 4 Elixir, it has a pretty good splash radius, it does a good bit of damage, and it's pretty tanky as well. Again, another good card on defense, and also another amazing card that you can put behind the Golem. Another necessity would have to be at least 1 small spell and 1 big spell. In this case, I'm using a Barbarian Barrel and a Poison, but I would say that these are interchangeable. Say you prefer a Giant Snowball instead of a Barbarian Barrel, because maybe you have it leveled up more because it's a common card, you could definitely use that. And if you're more of a Lightning guy compared to a Poison guy, you could for sure use a Lightning, or if you're facing a lot of buildings, I think an Earthquake is actually still pretty viable as well. So apart from those cards, I would say the other cards are somewhat interchangeable. I have the Dark Prince in here because I feel like it's so versatile, one of the most effective splash damaging cards in the entire game, and it can charge, it has a shield, it can survive any spell, it works so well. But if you want to, you could replace the Dark Prince with maybe something like a Lumberjack, a Mini Pekka, something along those lines, but I personally prefer the Dark Prince. Now again, the Goblin Cage is optional as well. In this deck, I used to have Tornado, but after they reworked Tornado and I found it not as effective for me, I swapped in the Goblin Cage, and I've honestly been doing better with the Goblin Cage than I ever did with the Tornado. It can still stop Hog Riders, it can still get King Tower activations from firecrackers and things like that. So the Goblin Cage is really solid, and also the Goblin Brawler can act really well on counter pushes. And then the Mega Minion is optional as well. I would recommend in the Mega Minion spot, if you don't want to use the Mega Minion, have something else that can do air damage, like whether you want to do a Flying Machine, Electro Dragon. You could put Skeleton Dragons in here along with the Baby Dragon, but something else that can do damage to air cards, definitely something I recommend. Even an Ice Wizard if you want. Go for it. And so yeah, that's the basic structure of really any Golem deck. Sure, there are a few other exceptions, like there's some weird Golem decks to have Flying Machine, Skeleton Barrel, and a Clone Spell, but that's like one deck. Most Golem decks will follow this basic pattern where it has at least a Golem, a Night Witch, a Baby Dragon, a big spell, a small spell, and other cards in there that are somewhat interchangeable. So yeah, you guys, that is going to wrap it up for today's Clash Royale video. I hope you guys found this Golem guide really helpful. This Golem guide, I'll admit, it didn't really have any super advanced strategies. This is really meant for the general public and for people that want to play Golem and for people that want to do well with it. So if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like down below. I greatly appreciate it. Let me know if you want more guides with decks like this. Really, Golem is the only deck I feel like I've really mastered. Maybe Graveyard is another one, but I could definitely work at other decks to get better at them, so that way I could put out more content like this. So let me know down below in the comment section. And also, if you're new to the channel and you like what you see, you like Clash Royale, then be sure to subscribe down below. I would greatly appreciate it. But anyway, guys, this is SolarFury signing off. Peace out, guys. Have a nice day.